You know that moment when you're scrolling through your phone and you get a notification from your bank app showing your account balance. And instead of immediately feeling that familiar knot in your stomach, you actually feel something different, something lighter. It's like the financial weight that's been sitting on your shoulders for months or maybe even years just suddenly lifts, and you can breathe again. There's a specific dollar amount where this transformation happens, and it's probably not what you think it is. Most people assume you need some massive windfall or inheritance to feel financially secure. Maybe you picture hitting six figures in your savings account, or landing that dream job with the huge salary. But here's what nobody talks about. There's actually a much smaller number that completely rewrites the rules of how money works in your life. That number is $20,000. My name is John, and I've spent the last decade studying why some people seem to effortlessly climb out of financial stress while others remain trapped in the same cycles year after year. If you're tired of feeling anxious every time you check your bank balance and you want to understand the real psychology behind financial freedom, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps shift your perspective on building wealth. Don't just watch, take notes. The real value is in what you apply, not just what you hear. There's a quick quiz at the end to test how much you've absorbed, and I'll share one book that completely changed how I see money. So make sure you stick around till the end. Now, before we dive into why $20,000 acts like a magic switch for your finances, let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a decision purely based on what you wanted instead of what you could afford? Think about that for a second. When did you last choose the restaurant you actually wanted to try instead of the one that fit your budget? When did you last book a trip somewhere because it sounded amazing instead of because it was the cheapest option available? Most people can't remember the last time they made a choice like that, and there's a reason why. When you don't have a financial cushion, every decision gets filtered through scarcity. Your brain becomes obsessed with what you can't afford rather than what's possible. But something incredible happens when you cross that $20,000 threshold, and it has nothing to do with the math of compound interest or investment returns. The real magic happens in your mind. Think of your brain like a computer that's been running too many programs at once. When you're constantly worried about money, a huge portion of your mental processing power gets dedicated to financial survival. You're calculating whether you can afford lunch out with coworkers. You're doing mental math about whether that car repair will leave you short on rent. You're lying awake at night running through worst-case scenarios about what happens if you lose your job. This isn't just stress. This is your cognitive bandwidth being hijacked by financial anxiety. Researchers have found that financial worry literally makes you less mentally sharp. Not permanently, but as long as that worry is consuming your mental resources, you can't think clearly about anything else. It's like trying to solve complex problems while someone is shouting in your ear. But watch what happens when you build up $20,000 in savings. Suddenly, that background noise in your brain gets turned down. You're not calculating the cost of every small purchase because you know you have a buffer. You're not panicking about unexpected expenses because you can handle them. Your mental energy gets freed up to focus on bigger questions and better opportunities. Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something that will probably surprise you. The confidence that comes from having $20,000 saved doesn't just affect your spending decisions. It completely transforms how you show up in every area of your life. When you're not desperate for money, you stop making desperate decisions. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're at work and your boss asks you to stay late again for the third time this week, even though it's not part of your job description. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, you probably say yes, even though you're frustrated about it. You need this job, you need the money, and you can't risk making waves. But when you have $20,000 sitting in your account, something shifts. You might still say yes if the request is reasonable, but you're no longer saying yes out of fear. You're making a choice based on what makes sense for your career and your life. And here's the crazy part. People can sense this difference in your energy. When you stop operating from desperation, others start treating you with more respect. This confidence boost creates what I call the $20,000 glow. You walk taller, you speak up more in meetings, you're willing to take calculated risks that you would never have considered before. And these changes don't go unnoticed. Opportunities start appearing that weren't there when you were stressed about money. But there's another layer to this transformation that most people completely miss. Having $20,000 saved doesn't just change how others see you, it fundamentally changes how you see yourself. You go from being someone who struggles with money to someone who has their finances under control. That identity shift is massive. Think about the discipline it takes to accumulate $20,000 from scratch. Unless you're making enormous amounts of money, this requires months or years of consistent saving. You had to resist impulse purchases. You had to say no to things you wanted. You had to stick to a plan even when it was boring or difficult. By the time you reach that $20,000 milestone, you've proven something incredibly important to yourself. You've demonstrated that you can control your money instead of letting it control you. You've shown that you can delay gratification when it matters. You've built the mental muscles that wealthy people use every single day. This psychological shift extends far beyond your bank account. When you know you can save $20,000, you start believing you can save $40,000, then $60,000, then $100,000. The goalposts keep moving, but your confidence in your ability to reach them keeps growing. And here's something fascinating that happens around this level. You start making different calculations about risk and reward. When you're broke, everything feels risky because you have no margin for error. Starting a side business feels impossible because what if it fails and you lose the money you invested? Switching careers feels terrifying because what if the new job doesn't work out? But $20,000 gives you permission to take smart risks. You can invest a few $1,000s in learning new skills without worrying about being able to pay rent. You can leave a job you hate because you know you have time to find something better. You can start that business you've been thinking about because failure won't destroy you financially. This is where the real wealth building begins. Not because $20,000 is a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but because it gives you the psychological space to think strategically instead of just surviving day to day. You shift from playing defense with your money to playing offense. The math of wealth building starts getting exciting at this point too, but probably not in the way you expect. Most people think the magic happens when your investments start generating serious returns, and while that's part of it, the real acceleration comes from something much more fundamental. When you have $20,000 saved, you've crossed over into a completely different category of person. You're no longer someone who spends everything they earn. You're someone who builds assets. And once you're in that category, everything about how money flows in your life begins to change. You start noticing patterns in how wealthy people think that were completely invisible to you before, like how they view expenses differently. When you're struggling financially, every purchase feels like money going down the drain. $5 for lunch, $20 for gas, $50 for groceries. It all feels like money disappearing from your life forever. But when you have that $20,000 foundation, you begin to understand the difference between spending and investing. That $50 you spend on groceries isn't money disappearing. It's fuel for your body so you can perform better at work and earn more money. That $100 you spend on professional development isn't an expense. It's an investment in your future earning potential. This shift in thinking is subtle but incredibly powerful. You stop seeing money as something that leaves your life and start seeing it as something that flows through your life. Some of it flows out to cover necessities, some flows out to improve your situation, and increasingly more flows back in through better opportunities and smarter decisions. Here's something that might sound counterintuitive, but it's absolutely crucial to understand. The people who build serious wealth aren't necessarily the ones who make the most money initially. They're the ones who learn to keep the most money. And keeping money isn't just about cutting expenses or living below your means, although those things matter. Keeping money is about understanding leverage. When you have $20,000, you have leverage in negotiations. When your car breaks down, You're not desperate to take the first financing deal the mechanic offers. You can pay cash and often negotiate a better price. When your lease is up, you're not stuck accepting whatever rent increase your landlord demands. You have options. This leverage extends to every financial transaction in your life. Insurance companies offer better rates to people who can pay annually instead of monthly. Credit card companies compete for customers who don't actually need credit. Employers pay more to people who aren't desperate for the job. It's almost like the financial system is designed to reward people who already have money and punish people who don't. Which sounds unfair until you realize that having money is largely a choice, not an accident of birth. Yes, some people start with advantages, but the vast majority of millionaires in America are first-generation wealthy. They figured out how to accumulate that first $20,000, and then they use the momentum to build something much bigger. The momentum piece is crucial because it affects more than just your bank balance. When you're consistently saving money month after month, you develop what psychologists call self-efficacy. You prove to yourself that you can set goals and achieve them. You build confidence in your ability to control outcomes in your life. This confidence starts showing up in unexpected places. You become more assertive in relationships because you're not financially dependent on other people's approval. You take better care of your health because you can afford preventive care instead of waiting for emergencies. You invest in learning new skills because you have the mental space to think about your future instead of just surviving the present. But here's where most people sabotage themselves, and it's heartbreaking to watch. They hit $20,000 and immediately start thinking about what they can buy with it. Maybe they've been driving an old car and they convince themselves they deserve something newer. Maybe they've been living in a small apartment and they decide it's time to upgrade. This is the exact moment where people either accelerate their wealth building or reset back to zero. That $20,000 isn't a shopping budget. It's not a reward for being disciplined. It's the foundation that everything else gets built on top of. Touch that foundation and you're starting over from scratch. Think about it like building a house. You wouldn't pour a concrete foundation and then immediately start chipping away at it to build a patio. The foundation is what allows everything else to exist. Your $20,000 emergency fund is the financial foundation that allows you to take risks, pursue opportunities, and build wealth without constantly worrying about survival. The people who understand this principle are the ones who go from $20,000 to $50,000 to $100,000 and beyond. The people who don't understand it are the ones who hit $20,000 multiple times throughout their lives, but never seem to build lasting wealth. And here's something that will probably frustrate you when you first hear it. The difference between these two groups isn't intelligence or income or luck. It's patience. The people who build wealth understand that $20,000 is just the beginning, not the destination. They're willing to live below their means, even when they could afford to live above them, because they understand the power of delayed gratification. This is where the psychology gets really interesting. When you have money saved, spending it feels good in the moment but terrible later. When you don't have money saved, not spending feels terrible in the moment but amazing later. Most people optimize for feeling good right now instead of feeling good long-term, which is why most people struggle financially their entire lives. But once you experience the peace of mind that comes from having money saved, you become addicted to that feeling. You realize that no purchase, no matter how exciting, can compare to the security and freedom that comes from financial stability. You start making decisions based on how you want to feel 6 months from now instead of how you want to feel 6 minutes from now. This long-term thinking completely transforms your relationship with money. You stop asking whether you can afford something and start asking whether it's worth it. You stop making financial decisions based on your current situation and start making them based on where you want to be in the future. And this is where something remarkable starts happening that most financial advice completely ignores. The $20,000 milestone doesn't just change your spending habits or your confidence level, it fundamentally rewires how you process information about opportunity and risk. When you're financially stressed, your brain operates in what neuroscientists call a threat detection mode. Every piece of financial information gets filtered through the lens of survival. You hear about someone starting a business, and your first thought is about all the ways it could fail. You hear about new opportunities and immediately focus on what you could lose instead of what you could gain. But something shifts when you have that financial cushion. Your brain starts processing the same information completely differently. Instead of immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios, you begin evaluating potential upside. That business idea doesn't seem impossibly risky anymore. Those investment opportunities start looking like actual opportunities instead of just ways to lose money. This shift affects every aspect of how you interact with money and career decisions. When a recruiter reaches out about a new position, you're not just thinking about whether the salary is higher. You're considering the long-term growth potential, the company culture, the skills you develop. When you hear about a real estate investment opportunity, you're not immediately dismissing it because of the down payment required. You're running numbers and considering whether it makes sense as part of your wealth-building strategy. Here's what's really fascinating about this psychological transformation. It doesn't happen gradually. There's an actual tipping point where your mindset flips from scarcity to abundance. And for most people, that tipping point happens right around $20,000 in savings. Think about why this specific number matters. $20,000 represents roughly 3 to 6 months of living expenses for the average person. That's enough time to find a new job if you get fired. It's enough to handle most emergency expenses without going into debt. It's enough to give you breathing room to make strategic decisions instead of desperate ones. But the psychological impact goes deeper than just practical considerations. Having $20,000 saved proves to yourself that you can accumulate significant amounts of money. Before this point, you might have had a few hundred or even a few $1,000s saved, but $20,000 feels different. It feels substantial. It feels like real money. This psychological milestone triggers what researchers call a competence cascade. Once you prove to yourself that you can save $20,000, you start believing you can save $40,000, then $60,000, then $100,000. Each milestone builds on the previous one, creating momentum that becomes incredibly powerful over time. And here's something that will probably blow your mind. The habits and mindset that got you to $20,000 are exactly the same habits and mindset that will get you to $200,000. The only difference is time and consistency. Most people think that building serious wealth requires some special knowledge or secret strategy that only rich people know about. But the truth is much simpler and honestly, much more encouraging. Wealth building is just basic math applied consistently over long periods of time. The $20,000 milestone is significant because it's where this mathematical reality starts becoming emotionally real. When you have a few $1,000s saved and it grows by 10%, you make a few $100s. Nice, but not life-changing. When you have $20,000 saved and it grows by 10%, you make $2,000. That's real money that actually impacts your life. This is when compound interest stops being just an abstract concept you learned about in school and becomes a tangible force working in your favor. You start understanding viscerally why Einstein supposedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. All right, let's test how you actually think. Imagine this. You have two options in front of you. One's cheaper, one's valuable. Which one do you pick? Be honest. Do you go for what's affordable right now, or what'll actually bring you more value later? Because that single decision, cheap versus valuable, quietly decides your entire financial future. Broke mindsets chase what's cheap. Builders? They chase value, even when it costs more upfront. So, write this down in your notes and comments section below. Do I choose comfort or do I choose leverage? That one question tells you exactly which mindset you're living in. If you want to go deeper into everything we just talked about, fear, leverage, mindset, and how money changes the way we think, there's one book you need to read. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's not a traditional finance book. It's about how human behavior controls wealth more than math ever will. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. That $20,000 milestone isn't about the money itself. It's about proving to yourself that you can fundamentally change how you operate in the world. It's about discovering that you have way more control over your financial future than you ever imagined. Start building that foundation today, because every day you wait is another day you're choosing to stay stuck in the same patterns that have kept you stressed about money. Your future self is counting on the decision you make right now.